Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. As people continue to log in, I just wanted to share, as I was preparing for this webinar, I was reminded of a celebrity tweet that I read in late April, basically kind of talking about, said, are these times certain or uncertain? Is there a precedent for this, or is it all unprecedented? I'm not sure, because I feel like no one is saying. So some good celebrity sarcasm there. But I feel like today, these are the words that are defining adjectives that we hear over and over and feel like it's just a fancy way of saying, we don't really know. But today in our hour, we're going to focus on things that we do know. We're going to hear from some great panelists that are going to relay some vital information that will help us build relationships with our local governments and allow us to keep business moving forward. So my name is Katie Gregory. I work with McGuireWoods Consulting. We are a national leader in integrated public affairs services beyond your traditional boundaries of governmental relations fields. We have capabilities that include federal, state, and local government relations, national and multi-state strategies, strategic communications, grassroots advocacy, business development, and public-private partnerships. We also have the ability to tap the vast knowledge of our McGuireWoods attorney, which we will do today when partner Ken Neighbors joins us later. This is a potent combination few firms match as we create client-focused teams that serve public, private, government, and nonprofit clients. With our multi-state presence, we are poised to track ever-evolving COVID business trends and provide vital up-to-date information to our clients, which we will do today. So I want to welcome you all to our discussion on the current business landscape in Georgia, especially as it pertains to opportunities and needs of our local governments here in our state. Thank you for joining us, and a special thank you to our speakers for carving out time in your schedules to talk with us today. A couple of quick housekeeping things. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent out to all the registrants. And we are planning time for Q&A at the end, and you can type any questions you may have in the chat function at the bottom of the page, and the speakers and I will see those, and hopefully we can address those at the end of all the presentations. So a quick start at the state level. So Georgia has just wrapped up an extended, I'll say, legislative session. The session began on January 13th, which was paused due to COVID concerns on March 14th, reconvened on June 15th, and just concluded June 26th. So one of the things that our General Assembly is actually constitutionally required to do is pass a balanced budget, which I'm sure was very interesting. And today we have Georgia Representative Clay Pirkle joining us. Representative Pirkle has been a part of the House of Representatives since 2015, and he represents the 155th District. He's the Vice Chair of the House Appropriations Committee, among other things, and we're very grateful to have you join us and excited to hear your perspective. Could you please tell us about the session and the uniqueness of working through the state budget this year?
Thank you, Katie, and I appreciate, I'm honored that you would have me on as a panelist to talk about the state government and the budget that we passed. On March the 10th, we had an outstanding budget that the House passed for 2021, and then COVID hit. The last Great Recession took about 4 to 5 years to fully manifest itself. This pandemic hit us financially in about 4 to 5 weeks. We first asked the agencies for 14% cut submission, which was exceedingly painful. And then new estimates came in, and we changed it to 11%, and we wound up the 2021 budget that we just passed last week, wound up with a 10% reduction overall, based on the results from the pandemic. Now, I do not speak for Chairman England nor Chairman Tillery, who are the appropriations in the House and the Senate, respectively, but I am a full-throated cheerleader for the budget that they passed, the work that went into it, and the outcomes of the budget. To use a baseball analogy, I feel like Greg Maddux is arguably the greatest pitcher in baseball that we've ever seen. And throughout his career, he never had more than an average fastball. But he made the most of what he had with location and the change of speed, and he had a 2-seam fastball that had late movement that was just unworldly. But the point is, he made the most of what he had. And I feel like through this budget, we made the most of what we had. Now, I have 2 copies of the budget. It's 171 pages. It over 2,000 changes from the first initial submission that we had, and I'll walk through all of those now. I'm just kidding. The budget is, I'm going to give you an overview because there's just no way to do it in the 8 minutes I have left to give you a good taste, but I will give you a sample of the things that we were added into the budget, some of the reductions, and how we came up with this. First off, let's look at law enforcement. In GBI, we added almost $2 million for up to 17 scientists and 10 lab techs to clear the sexual assault case backlog that we have, the rape kits. We've made yeoman's effort in reducing those, but we still need more workers in order to get that backlog seen. And we also added $1 million to outsource chemistry testing to help clear the chemistry backlog with the GBI. Additionally, we added $15 million. I know, so I'm going to add some additions we have in this budget. There are significant reductions, but we did add additions. One is $15 million to establish law enforcement de-escalation training, which I think we all can see the need and how positive that could be for the state. One of the best bang for buck projects that we have in the state is accountability courts, where we give nonviolent offenders, we realize that we are better as a state if they are productive citizens rather than incarcerating them in prison. And so in this budget, the accountability courts are fully restored. The funding is fully restored. That means that approximately 2,000 participants can be served through the accountability courts rather than prison now. And some of these have a 75% or greater success rate. That is a great bang for buck, turning people into citizens, productive citizens, rather than incarcerating them in prison. So the accountability courts are fully restored. We restored funding for the Georgia Public Defenders Council. That's enough to hire an additional 22 state public defenders. Changing gears somewhat, agriculture is our largest industry in the state. This budget restores 30 positions to the Department of Agriculture. These are our food safety, our animal industry inspectors, our lab analysts, those people that make sure the food that we consume is safe. And we fully restored those cuts to the Department of Agriculture. Similarly, with the Forestry Commission, we are the #1 timber producer in the nation. The state of Georgia is. And we provided $2.7 million to keep and maintain the fire suppression equipment. So that $2.7 million was restored. Transportation. We must get our product here and yonder on our roads and bridges. Their bond package is $115 million for road repair and rehab of roads and bridges. Also, another $37.2 million in the bond package for our state railroads to repair, replace, and renovate. Those are vital going forward for moving goods and services across this great state. Education is a big one. 53 cents of every dollar in state spending goes to education. That being said, you cannot have any cuts in the budget of any significance without also impacting education somewhat. QBE was reduced $950 million. Now, that was offset somewhat by the $457 odd million in CARES funding that went to our local school systems. Through the pandemic and looking at funding, we did additional research and found, and our school systems have done a marvelous job. After the recession and building up the reserves, we found that our local school systems have reserves of $3.4 billion in reserves, more than what we have in our revenue shortfall, our quote-unquote rainy day fund in the state, which began at $2.8 billion, $2.9 billion. prior to this pandemic. However, there were no reductions for equalization grants, and actually those increased by $32 million. There was an increase of $1 million in sparsity grants. That's for school systems that have student population below the base school size, so they don't receive enough earnings from QBE funding for personnel and operations. So we put a focus on those school systems that will be most impacted by the COVID. An anomaly that we did not see, and I'm an economist, that I did not see, I can't say that we, but I did not see coming, is the strong revenue that we saw in the Georgia lottery. As such, there's full funding for the pre-K and HOPE scholarships. As an aside, we also did put guardrails to stabilize the HOPE program through HB 444 that put guardrails on this popular system so it could be used for our students for higher education going forward. Regarding health, the budget reflects the priorities that we've established. One of the things that we needed work on is maternal mortality. We have a high incidence of maternal mortality. Included in our budget is almost $20 million to provide 6 months of postpartum Medicare coverage or Medicaid coverage to address the high incidence of maternal mortality. We also restored $1.5 million in proposed cuts through maternal mortality prevention grants to hospitals. We also restored almost $14 million in cuts to public health grants to counties. That's in spite of the drain that we saw. We recognize the severe strain on rural hospitals through this pandemic, and we increased by $12 million from the existing $3 million for rural hospitals stabilization grants. Also, we increased Medicaid reimbursements. In spite of decreased state revenues, we increased the Medicaid reimbursement rates for 108 primary care codes. We restored $1.7 million for a rural surgery initiative and added $250,000 in new funding for the rural psychiatry residency program at Colquitt Medical Center. Higher ed also did have some cuts, but we restored $78 million to their budget to eliminate furloughs. We added, and it's a small add, but it could be significant going forward, $150,000 to begin a rural technical worker pilot program with our technical schools. And also another bang for buck. One of the great programs we have that was started by Governor Deal is the REACH scholarship program. We have included $1 million to fund 13 new school systems in this REACH scholarship program. Human services. We restored $53 million to DBHDD, DHS, Department of Veteran Services. We added $2.5 million for 95 crisis beds. We restored funding for addiction and recovery services, which allows 17 recovery centers to remain open. We also added $5.6 million for 100 new now and comp waivers for the intellectually and developmentally disabled. One of the positives, and I'm going to wrap up because I know I'm running out of time. One of the positives come out of COVID is finding efficiencies in the manner that the state provides services to its citizens. Many departments actually discovered increases in worker efficiencies from telework. Two prime examples are DFACS and the Department of Revenue. And so this budget also reflects increased reliance on continuing in some manner to provide more efficiencies in telework schedules for state employees. I would love to go into more detail, and I hadn't even touched. Katie, you tell me what you want me to do about the legislation that we passed and some of the keys. Do you want to wait for later, or do I need to go through that now?
I think we can go ahead if you want to drop in. We'll just tie it all together. You're doing great.
All right, thank you. There are a couple of really cool legislative fixes that we added. One of probably the most significant substance is HB 276, the Marketplace Facilitator. It requires them to collect and remit sales and use tax to the state, puts them in parity with our brick and mortar stores, and marketplace facilitators they should have been doing it all along, providing the sales tax for the state, for the our local citizens. Through the pandemic, SB 359, Senator Huffstetler has the COVID-19 Pandemic Business Safety Act. It provides for certain immunities from liability regarding COVID-19 and businesses starting up. It does not waive immunity if the business, and these are legal terms that your lawyers will know, but proves gross negligence, willful and wanton misconduct, and reckless or intentional infliction of harm. That is a vital key piece of legislation in getting the businesses going and thriving for the state. We had a couple of one of the biggest issues that I have with my constituents we addressed this time relating to surprise billing. Dr. Mark Newton had a bill in the House, HB 789, that provides an at-a-glance view for the public to see, with green checks and red X's, the proclivity with your insurance company at a certain facility, the incidence of having a surprise bill. And Chairman Hawkins, HB 888, had a surprise billing that actually removes the consumer from between the insurance company and the healthcare provider by providing arbitration to settle the recoupment. It's I think is a great start for helping to solve this surprise billing issue. There are many others. I mean, senior living. We passed legislation, Chair Lady Cooper, regarding safeguards for senior living and memory care units. Another really cool bill that doesn't sound very sexy. Dr. Dean Burke passed legislation that creates an all-payer claims database. And what that does is it facilitates a data-driven and guidance and evidence-based improvements in access and quality and the cost of healthcare. In layman's terms, it analyzes the bang for buck in healthcare. Going forward, that will be a vital tool for us as we examine healthcare in the state. There's many more I could go into, but I'm going to stop right here, Katie.
Well, great. No, thank you. I think everyone appreciates the look from both sides. Y'all did a lot of work outside of budget, and we are very thankful for you and for how you represent your citizens and all the citizens of Georgia. I know, especially this year, that was a tricky thing of being able to get back in and do all of that. So thank you for your hard work. And maybe we will get a part 2, and we can hear more on some of the great legislation that also came out of session. So let me move on down into our local government piece. Also joining us today is Beth Brown, who is the Director of Strategy and Innovation with the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia, ACCG, and Charlotte Davis, Senior Governmental Relations Associate, and Kelly Bennett, Communications Director, both with the Georgia Municipality Association, GMA. I will start, Beth and Kelly, if you would like to give us a quick overview of your association, and then tell us kind of what you're hearing from your members these days. What are their concerns and the needs that the local governments are expressing to you all and looking for help with? Beth, if you want to start, that would be great.
Sure, I'll start. Thanks, Katie. So like you said at the beginning, there are just certain words and phrases that we are all getting a little tired of hearing, like unprecedented times and social distancing and contact tracing and all those things that were not even really in our vocabulary prior to March of this year. I will say our Executive Director, Dave Wills, keeps saying we'll all be glad when COVID-19 has taken its rightful place on the History Channel instead of on our news channels every single day. A lot of you probably are aware of who ACCG is and what we do. I'll just give you just a quick summary of that. We were created in 1914 by county commissioners that were trying to qualify for federal road funding from the national government. to get federal road construction funding for Georgia. So our roots are and origins are in working with county commissioners, but today we really do work on behalf of county governments across the state and work with others well beyond the elected officials. We're best known probably for our lobbying team at the state capitol, but we also work with our partners at the National Association of Counties on federal issues that are before Congress. In addition, we have a leadership development program in partnership with the Carl Vinson Institute of Government over at UGA to help to make our county officials better leaders in their local communities. And then lastly, we have an area that we refer to as membership services. And this is where we provide insurance and retirement programs for counties. This branch also has a county consulting team that provides technical assistance, strategic planning and meeting facilitation for counties. And then we also do things like vehicle and equipment financing, facilities financing, and those types of things for counties across the state. Just like your businesses, county government, the world changed drastically when March came and the virus started coming into Georgia. At that time, we're normally in the full court press mode with the General Assembly and in its final days. And of course, as you just heard, that all hit a pause and it came to a standstill. The counties turned to us as a primary source for information, as they usually do in this kind of situation. We became a frontline source of information for the counties. We initially started translating the executive orders coming out of the governor's office. We were filtering all the information coming from the federal and state agencies, monitoring calls for them, sharing information, tracking trends, just trying to do the best that we could to contain and collect the information and package it and send it back out to them. And we did that really in a once daily update because just like everybody else, everybody started getting inundated with news coverage and email and everything else. So we saw our job as really packaging and filtering what they needed to get or actions they needed to take to be prepared for funding or response or other things that were going on. When the virus first hit Georgia for county governments, and you're probably going to hear similar things from Kelly, but the main issues that we dealt with were what their local authority was to put restrictions in place prior to the governor's emergency declarations, which sort of changed that perspective a little bit. How do we provide accessibility to county facilities to keep both our staff and the public safe? How do we get PPE for first responders and others? There was a shortage at the beginning, and GEMA was great in helping to fill the gaps, but that was a real challenge for the first few weeks. And then how do we transition programs and services and staff and all those things to be able to contain or have continuity of service in times when we had offices closed and trying to get government folks, local folks working from home that may not have those kinds of setups that others do. Once those things started settling down, it really transitioned to the challenges of access for testing for their constituents and their communities, making sure we had protections in place for the staff and for the public as we moved into more of a reopening facility, steps, and then how do we take those reopening steps, what opens first, and how do you handle processes and procedures for things like social distancing to make sure that all of those things work. Now, as we head out of May and June into July, what we're seeing really is responding when we have positive cases in the workplace. We're seeing those every single day. I saw there was a news article today from Chatham County with their courthouse where they're having to shut down, to get things cleaned again. So jails, courthouses, elections offices, first responders, none of them are immune to this, and so they're having to handle those situations as they arise. That usually means quarantining and isolating employees, closing offices, having them deep clean, rotating shifts of employees in so you have Team A and Team B in different places to make sure you have coverage. I think that's going to continue as long as we're facing the pandemic. We're continuing to work with them to encourage them to support CDC and DPH guidelines in place for things like social distancing, wearing a mask in public places, practicing good hygiene, hand washing, all of those things. Our counties are really taking on some of those frontline messaging to try and complement what the state is doing to try and get to slow the spread again as we're seeing the rise of cases again. And then we're trying to return to business as normal as they can to keep programs and services going in the midst of COVID-19. So last week I saw a photo on Facebook of a county that had posted a picture holding a bid meeting outside so people could be 6 feet apart. So, how do you get back to business as usual as much as you can and keep things moving like we need to, at the same time, taking the right precautions and being safe. Right now, what we're hearing from them, honestly, is they're really interested in the CARES Act funding. Governor Kemp last week reached out and let us know that he was going to be passing down a local share of some of those state CARES funds that had come through, and he gave the local jurisdictions the amount they would be receiving. At this time, we're still waiting on the guidelines for how to use the portal to document those reimbursements and to really begin to get more clarity for our local governments on what's reimbursable. Certainly, we have the guidance from the Treasury. We know the obvious things that are direct COVID response, things like PPE, but there's a lot of questions from counties coming. For example, we had a county ask this week, everybody's at home and they're cleaning out their closets and they're taking all their stuff to our solid waste stations. We're seeing a huge increase in our disposal costs for these. We're in a small county. Does that count as we have a reimbursable expense for our increased disposal costs? So those are the kinds of things that they're trying to figure out how to manage, and whether they can get reimbursement for some of those things that have occurred during these interesting times that we're in. So we're hopeful that when we have the portal open and the state's vendor is in place, that since they're responsible for making sure all of those expenses are documented correctly, they can answer those questions that may not be quite as clear in the Treasury guidance as we'd like it to be. One of the things that y'all asked me to do also was to talk about how y'all can connect with local government. So ACCG, because of our tax status, we don't necessarily endorse businesses, but we do look for ways to let companies interact with counties by way of working with ACCG. So we do have a partners program. You can find information about that on our website. We do have vendor opportunities at different conferences and events when they're occurring. We have paused pretty much all of those for 2020, like many that are not holding in-person events this year. And again, we have sponsorship at a lot of those things as well. If you're a partner with ACCG, you receive all of our communications. That includes our magazine, our e-newsletters, our legislative updates, and all of those different tools that are good ways to kind of keep a pulse on what's happening in county government and know what the trends are and what people are doing across the state. If you're in the banking industry, there's ways for you to get involved in our financing programs to be notified when we're looking to borrow money. People borrow money for different projects. And Brent Williams on our team is responsible for all of those types of things for the partners program, the financing program, the sponsorship program. So if you're interested in those, you can reach out to me afterwards and I will connect you with Brent. And then the other piece that you might be interested in and may not be aware of is that we have a combined program with GMA. It's called the Georgia Local Government Access Marketplace. It's www.glga.org. And on there you can find items that counties have out for bids. And so that's a good place to look to see what people are looking for today. So I looked this morning and there's 64 different things out there ranging from engineering to building construction to road resurfacing to vehicles to a whole host of things. So that's a good place also to look. You're trying to figure out what services you provide that they might be interested in. So I think that gives you maybe a quick overview of what's happening with counties across the state, and I'll pause and let Kelly jump in, and then we can answer any questions you might have.
Great, thank you.
Awesome, thanks so much, Beth. Thanks for that. I'm glad you went first. Literally, as you're talking, I'm crossing off things I don't have to repeat. So thank you. So I'm Kelly Bennett, the Director of Communications for the Georgia Municipal Association. And I like to think of GMA as like the fairy godmother for Georgia cities. So we work daily to anticipate and influence the forces shaping all of Georgia cities to provide leadership, tools, and services that assist across the state and cities across the state in becoming more innovative, effective, and responsive. So how do we do that? We really focus that through our three main pillars, which are advocacy, service, and innovation. We are a voluntary nonprofit that works to focus on those three pillars. Now, kind of our structure, so we are governed by a 66-member board of directors, which is comprised of city officials across the state. Program implementation comes from those board of directors to our executive director, Larry Hansen, and the staff of our over 90 full-time employees. And we're growing by the day, believe me. Now, on top of everything that cities are facing on a daily basis, when we talk about, get the question of what's going on, what are we hearing at GMA, our biggest concerns really evolve around the two crises that we're dealing with. One, Beth really talked a lot about the COVID-19 pandemic, but we're also facing that of social injustice and racism. So as far as COVID-19, we did a lot of things similar for our cities that ACCG is. So I won't repeat everything just to save time and get to the question portion. But we were able, as soon as COVID really hit our nation and our state hard, we implemented a microsite, a full microsite we call our COVID-19 Resource Center for municipal leaders. And this has pertinent information. We have everything here from state and federal resources, funding opportunities, teleworking, municipal operations, and more on this research center. We also have a back to office checklist that our field consultants they were checking the pulse of all of our members. As they're getting questions, we're putting together documents as they go back into office, mask ordinances, public employment law FAQs, really just to keep our city safe from any type of lawsuit, but also from this virus, this new virus that that's just taking shape in Georgia so rapidly. CDC guidance, Department of Public Health guidance. There's so much on the website, a lot that like I said, of what ACCG is doing, GMA also did for our cities in regards to summaries of our executive orders. We do a COVID-19 resource tracker. But another thing we're also doing is really asking our cities, what is going on? Can you tell us what's happening in your cities? And we do that through our, one way is through our COVID revenue tracker, our COVID-19 revenue tracker, where it's literally a form online, and we want to know, where are you losing money? What's going on? So we have that that kind of ask and tell going on for our cities, as well as a lot of testing sites and updates. And one of the really great opportunities that we provide all of our mayors and city stakeholders is a weekly call with the DPH Commissioner, Dr. Toomey, and also Director Homer Bryson of GMA. So that's been a valuable resource for our cities. They are able to submit questions before the call that we ask. I mean, sometimes our questions, they can go up to, 20 questions a day for both Dr. Toomey and Homer Bryson, we've received a lot of good feedback and a lot of great information for our members. CARES Act funding, as Beth mentioned, is huge. We're getting a lot of, both ACCG and GMA did a really heavy lift to support the state with getting all of our cities and counties their banking information and just really being the liaison there. So they're having a lot of questions, and we're working with the governor's office as well as our federal relations team to provide cities much needed updates and guidance for that funding. So that's a lot there, and I talked really fast through that just because I didn't want to repeat Beth too much. But going into kind of the equity and inclusion piece, so GMA is doing a lot for, our cities are always coming to us. We also have under our service umbrella, our biggest partnership is with the Carl Vinson Institute of Government. And so we are so cities are saying, so what can we do as cities to be more inclusive, to talk about racism, to have these conversations? And this is new for us, so we're working with the Carl Vinson Institute of Government, as well as cities who have already put processes and ordinance into place to see how we can help cities shape the future and be more inclusive. So that's a really exciting and important thing that we're working on now. We've also built a equity and inclusion toolkit that we update daily for our cities and push out through our weekly newsletters, and working on some articles for the census, and then for that equity and inclusion piece. Now, as far as other things that we're doing and we're hearing, there's just like I said, a lot going on in Charlotte. We'll get into that later, but we do have cities that are still, they had issues before the COVID-19 pandemic, and figuring out ways to make our services fit those and make them most make sense for cities, and be really mindful to the fact that they are dealing with financial strain. So how can we be of service to them? And I'll go into the second question that we were asked, as far as how can your businesses really keep in contact and be visible to the 538 cities across Georgia. And very similar to ACCG, we have what we call a business alliance program. So you will be considered participants, and through this program, you'll be offered an array of opportunities to engage with elected officials and stakeholders. Some of those, so we have 3 different levels of participation, and some of those opportunities include virtual sponsorships. Well, now we have a lot of virtual sponsorships opportunities, as well as magazine. You have magazine ads and newsletter banners that you'll be able to look at. You also have discounted rates for our different services, and we have a full PDF 20-page document that goes into detail about this, and I'll be happy to share more should you have some questions during our Q&A portion. But those are a lot of ways, especially our Business Alliance program, to really connect with cities. And if you're already doing business in cities, you know, we do a lot of case studies, and we do a lot of, our cities will submit stories that hit all of our magazine recipients, and that may be a way for you to have some organic coverage. So there are a lot of ways to connect to cities and to really engage with them through that Business Alliance program. Was there anything else that we needed to cover for GMA?
You have dropped a lot of really good information out there. So
okay.
If you have anything else,
Perfect.
That's great. Thank you so much. One more, and Charlotte, I think this is in your wheelhouse of what about projects and RFPs? Like you said, we have, you know, pre and post COVID. So are you seeing any trends or hearing anything with, you know, contracts and RFPs? Is it just kind of pause for the moment? We'll delay everything for a year, or, you know what, we need to get this done. Can you talk about anything that you are seeing or what's affecting kind of the large projects that may be out there for cities?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Charlotte Davis. I also work at GMA just on the governmental relations side. And as we've mentioned, GMA represents Georgia's 538 cities, and they're all very different. So their approach, as you might imagine, to the new normal and continuing with projects during this new normal has been unique based on the city that you're in or you wish to work with. But just some overarching, the landscape that we're in. So prior to COVID-19, it seemed that the overarching trend, particularly in cities in the metro area, was that, you know, construction was constant and projects for permits and new development were continuing to be applied for at the local level. And really, in many cases, cities were contacting us looking for help to hire more employees to process building permits and really just help with the construction process with RFPs and RFQs. And really finding those employees at the time was the challenge, because the demand on the cities was large in the construction arena, which we saw as a good thing. We actually worked with a coalition of builders, engineers, architects, and others during the 2019 session of the General Assembly, because we kept hearing from the industry that in cases where local governments, you know, didn't have the proper staffing or capacity to do particularly plan review and inspections for construction projects, that there should be a third-party private route that applicants could choose. And we thought that that was really, you know, reflective of the high demand of the new projects and construction that we've thankfully been able to enjoy throughout Georgia, and really speaks to Georgia's marketplace. So this law was passed in 2019. It's on the books, and it's been working fairly well in Georgia, at least from the municipal perspective. But so now fast forward to 2020, and of course we're in the COVID-19 pandemic, and I think it's really actually highlighted the importance for that process and for third-party applicants. Many of y'all might remember, you know, during the shelter in place several months ago, many cities halted all their processes, especially if they were for non-essential work. So in a lot of cases, this did include permitting, RFPs, inspections, and plan reviews. So we did hear from the building industry again that in many of those cases, their projects were being delayed. And currently in Georgia law, we call them, you know, large mega scale projects are not eligible for the third-party private review anyhow. So this was problematic for the industry. So they came to us at GMA and also to ACCG. And we were actually able to find a legislative fix in the last final few days of this past legislative session in 2020, even with it being fragmented, that will allow for those large mega projects to continue being built, and with the option for third-party providers to come in and help with plan review and inspection. And so when I say mega projects, that means construction of jails and hospitals and nursing homes, and particularly one we kept hearing about as an issue in the city of Atlanta was high-rises, because so many high-rise developments have been hitting the skyline. So that bill is currently sitting on Governor Kent's desk, but we do obviously anticipate that he'll be signing it. And that will certainly help keep those large projects going, because we don't know how long COVID-19 will be with us. But in general, and we've already touched on this, but I think it's hard to have one rule of thumb because this is different for every city. But we do know that cities will continue to maintain as smooth of operations as possible, particularly as it relates to new development in their city, even in this virtual world.
Perfect. Thank you. That's a great summary of that. I know everybody's always excited. Anything that seems like a sense of normality coming back after we've all been kind of turned upside down with this. So, you know, having a realistic expectations of things going on and how everything is operating right now, and kind of that triage moment and moving forward. So now I'd like to pass the baton, so to speak, to partner Ken Neighbors with our McGuireWoods law firm, who Ken is going to talk to us, and as he and I spoke, he will demystify, I loved his adjective, P3s, private-public partnerships, for us, as hopefully as things continue to kind of move forward and get back in that sense of, in some of those large projects, as maybe a new tool that we can look into. And I'll let you continue from there.
All right, ready to go. Good afternoon, everybody. It was really hard to follow these panelists, and I know you're chomping at the bit to get questions in, but I did want to make everybody pause and reflect that there is great connectivity with everything each of the speakers said and what they do in their respective roles, from the state legislature down to the groups that advocate for our Georgia cities and counties, and there are many. You know, and I will borrow the representative's analogy or saying, you know, making the most of what you have. I would concur with that position. I think that is exactly what public-private partnerships do, and I also concur that Greg Maddox clearly he's in my top 3 at least, and got to see him play. So with that said, you know, what is a P3? So everybody out there probably gets what I call the billion-dollar snob approach to P3s. That if it's not a billion-dollar toll road or airport deal or bridge, it's not really a P3. And I have been saying this consistently for years, that cities and counties and local developers have been doing public-private partnerships for a generation or so. And we call that variety social P3s, social infrastructure projects. And we'll talk about that really quickly, but before I get there, I'm going to start where I should have started and say a P3 is merely an accelerated delivery method. It's a way to bring a project to fruition when the governmental sector does not have all the funds that they need on hand. Traditionally, if you want to sign a contract in most areas of government, city, county, and state, the entity has to have the money on hand. Authorities are different. There are different matters of economic development, other authorities that are created under Georgia law, and so they have more flexibility. But if you're talking about a city, a county, or the state, right, you really have to access a P3 for a major project for which you do not have all the funds on hand if you want to make it ready before you have the cash. And so it's just a way of getting things faster with stress funding. I will say this too, mission critical activities clearly first. Like, do not disrespect the fact that cities and counties in the state are focusing on life, health, and safety issues. But I bring you the good news though, that the local governmental entities and the state, the things that they have that are transformational, that are major economic development juggernauts, or that just move the economic needle in your respective city or county, I don't think they've taken their eye off those things. And so the question is, how do we find a way to match that opportunity with the great inconvenience of the times that we're in, but not miss the moment. And so this is where we get to making the most out of what you have. All right, so let's a casebook example. When GM decided to leave Doraville back right before the Great Recession, as we call it, right? The DeKalb County and Doraville and others were looking at ways to make that happen. But what you have to do, you had to understand what the legislation said at the moment, what funding you had available under your current economic development tools, right? A tax allocation district, as an example, TIFs everywhere else. And then, hey, as we're in the planning process and the economy goes downward, well, do I have a developer that has the wherewithal to help work through that cycle, understanding that real estate is all about cycles? And then number two, are there any federal tools that are going to be brought to bear? And if so, will I be ready to access those tools before they sunset out or before others use them? And so that's why that's the good news, that this really is about finding a way to plan out and continue to keep on the drawing board, and maybe even design. And, you know, we heard about the efficiencies of working from home. There have been a lot of positives that have come from work from home, not the social side of things, but in terms of worker productivity in many spaces. And in our law firm, as an example, we've been very productive. And while you miss the meetings and the face-to-face and the comings and goings, you can get a lot of work done if you get up early. And the question is, are you working all day long as opposed to shutting down? But back to the matters at hand. P3s range from things like city hall buildings. I did one of those for the city of Decatur through GMA. That was one of my second social P3 projects, maybe my third in Georgia. Educational facilities. You know, so sometimes the way you do a charter school or an alternative education school is done through a public-private partnership. Parking facilities. I will tell you that a traditional tax allocation district, or TIF, is by its very essence a public-private partnership. The government puts in its incremental taxes for infrastructure and committed vertical development in exchange for the developer developing and bringing out the leverage. And so maybe I put in $1 and I get 9 additional private sector dollars of investment, right? So those metrics are very important. And again, you know, if you can find a way to match the funding for the downside, this being the downside, and bridge that gap to ordinary economic times as you project out in your feasibility study, sometimes you can have the private sector bring the upfront capital with the public sector bringing the kind of the midland and the rear end capital and match book. Assembly was a great example of that. Hey, we didn't know the pace of development, so we used tax allocation district funding, special assessments. And so if I don't develop in time to pay off those bonds, I'll impose a special assessment, right? So the developer bets on itself. And then some other tools were brought to bear. So another example of layered financing to help in uncertain economic times. In that case, it was micro project uncertainty versus more of a macro economic uncertainty. So turning to my next page, you know, the reality is there's just a tremendous backlog of infrastructure projects. Georgia, by the way, got its first upgrade, but we get a C+ in 2019 by the American Society of Engineers. The United States gets a D+. There's a multi-trillion-dollar backlog in the U.S. level, and the sectors that they rate, and we got, again, a C+. The sectors they rate: ports, aviation, bridges, roads, drinking water, wastewater, dams, schools, transit, energy, hazardous waste, inland waterways, levees, public parks, right? Not healthcare facilities from what I saw, but a lot of room under that umbrella to come up with some way creatively to move the needle for Georgia forward and get that C+ up where we know we'll be. What's driving that in Georgia? We moved population from 9.7 million in 2010 to about 10.5 million in 2019. So we're a major player. I will kind of ask that, you know, or end with, again, you know, what is the important thing here? The important thing is to be developer or shovel development or shovel ready as fast as, the more the preliminary planning you can get done now, the more you can look at the preferred procurement method at the local governmental level, and the development community, if they can look at, hey, this is how we would do it. The more advanced that thinking is, the faster you can hit the road to actually accessing future funding opportunities. And we understand there's a House bill out there that includes $1.5 trillion of infrastructure funding, right? Includes private activity bond expansions to include small farms, right? And other things that would drive the needle for Georgia. We know that ARA funding in the last recession was pretty nicely and well used by Georgia, and so we have, do we want to continue to be leaders in cybersecurity, healthcare facilities, think broadband, right? If we're working from home, if we're educating our children from home, they can't get to a library. Everybody needs broadband, right? So where are the opportunities there? So there's a lot of opportunity. That's how I'd like to end this. I do think the juice is worth the squeeze, and I do think we need to make the most out of it.
Thank you, Ken. Yes, I appreciate ending on a high note. I think out of all of our things, that is consistently the theme, that yes, everybody is doing, like you said, the best we can with what we have. I like that. We are also watching Hamilton on repeat on Disney Plus these days. So as being thankful for what we're seeing and the things that are moving forward, history is happening, as it says. So we have about 10 minutes left. If there are any questions, again, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. If anybody has a question for any of our panelists, we're more than happy to pass that on. So I'll pause for a moment if anybody's typing. So I don't see anything instantly, but if you're like me, it'll come to you in about 5 or 10 minutes later after everything's over. So there is information that we will pass forward on how to contact us or our speakers. If there's anything that you've heard today that you would like more details on or to talk about further, we are all more than happy to engage you and would love to continue those discussions. And if not, then I'll give you all 8 minutes back into your afternoon. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we appreciate you all joining us. Thank you so much to our speakers for all the great information and for taking time with us today. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.